I sensed something was wrong when Leland, the CEO who once wept into the leaves of my office plant during the 2020 layoffs, addressed the company-wide meeting with the look of a man who just traded his conscience for a mindfulness subscription. "I'll be taking some time for a mental clarity sabbatical," he announced, as if he hadn't just authorized 3 colossal vendor audits and a fourth-quarter overhaul that threatened to sink us. And then came the kicker. During my absence, I've asked Sloan to serve as acting CEO. Sloan, his daughter, recently graduated from some prestigious MBA factory that taught her startup culture and corporate stability were the exact same thing. She entered the room 5 minutes later in stilettos sharp enough to puncture steel and carrying a designer handbag that likely cost more than my entire Kia Forte. "We're streamlining," she announced, smiling like a person who had yet to understand what a balance sheet was. I gave her the benefit of the doubt for approximately 6 seconds. Then she produced a color-coded organizational chart and spread it over the glass conference table, as though she were planning the seating for a gala at the art museum. "We're becoming agile, lean, nimble," she declared, tapping on names as if choosing sides for a schoolyard game. Only in this version, those picked last received severance packages. She couldn't tell the difference between operations and finance, but she was fluent in buzzwords: disruption, velocity, paradigm shifts. Sloan possessed a whole TED Talk's worth of jargon with none of the actual insight. She informed the marketing head that she wanted more viral content, as if it were a pizza you could order from Quick Eats. I asked if she was referring to increased organic reach or a new brand campaign. She just blinked and asked if I was opposed to progress. 12 years. I had been with this company for 12 years, through budget cuts, 3 unsuccessful acquisitions, 1 major ransomware incident, and the infamous espresso machine uprising of 2017. I had held this company together with sheer will and duct tape more times than I could recall. And now, I was in a room watching a 26-year-old who had never seen a profit and loss statement question whether we truly needed a compliance department. By 3 p.m., 2 employees had been dismissed. Sloan paraded around like a prom queen presiding over an execution, all smiles and menacing purpose. She uttered phrases like, "I just want to empower the people who are truly committed, and we have to think like champions, not just survivors." I was tempted to inquire how many champions she knew who had ever had to run payroll from a spreadsheet after a server failure, but I held my tongue. Look, I understand the routine. I'm not some relic afraid of progress, but there's a distinction between progress and setting fire to a warehouse full of kindling. Sloan wasn't attempting to lead. She was cosplaying as a leader. Her father had given her the keys to a complex machine she had no idea how to operate, and we were all just passengers along for the crash. And listen, a brief aside while we plunge into this corporate spectacle. I know you're here for the drama. So am I. But this is my first time sharing these experiences publicly, and I've set a personal target of 10,000 subscribers. Not for recognition, not for acclaim, just to confirm for myself that these kinds of stories have value. If you've read this far, and are half as amused as I was horrified, hit subscribe like it's Sloan's social media feed after the dust settles. Now, back to the story. At 4:17 p.m., a notification appeared in my inbox. A calendar invitation. Catch up with Sloan's CEO office. No subject line. No agenda. Just a time slot and a location that felt less like a meeting and more like a hearing. I entered her office. She was already there, legs crossed, sipping a green, self-satisfied concoction from a glass jar, as if she were purging herself of competence. "Close the door," she instructed, and I complied, but not before I saw my reflection in the glass. Weary eyes, stooped shoulders, and a spine tingling with alarms. Because whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be encouraging. Sloan bypassed any pretense of small talk. Instead, she glanced up from her expensive seaweed smoothie, looking already uninterested, and stated it plainly. "Your position doesn't fit with my vision. Just like that, 12 years of operational problem-solving, interdepartmental crises, 3 different CRM system migrations, and a disaster recovery plan I had personally drafted from nothing, and I didn't fit, not with her vision, which, from what I could gather, was composed of aesthetically pleasing whiteboards and whatever she'd skimmed on the front page of a business magazine that morning. I blinked. "I understand," I managed to say, even as my ears rang, and the unfinished coffee rose in my throat like acid. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that reeked of expensive perfume and self-deception. "It's not personal." A buzzer sounded from under her desk. She had already pressed it. I turned to see 2 security guards from the reception area enter, as if I'd been discovered selling state secrets from the supply closet. One of them gave me a nod, as if we were familiar acquaintances. We were not. "You can collect your personal belongings now, or we can arrange to have them shipped," Sloane said, arranging a stack of sticky notes like a quintessential movie villain. "It's your decision. Totally my decision," as if choosing between being robbed and being struck by a bus is a choice. I rose slowly, clinging to whatever shred of dignity remained as the entire floor, my floor, watched from the safety of their desks. No one spoke. Not Simon from IT, who had once broken down in my office about his divorce. Not Priya from procurement, for whom I had personally advocated in her last performance evaluation. Not even Desmond, who was well aware that the supply chain was still held together by my spreadsheets. They simply watched. I left with my coffee mug, a succulent I had managed to keep alive for 5 years, and a lone dry cleaning receipt. That was all. Security flanked me as if I were about to self-destruct, but I didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't afford Sloane the gratification of seeing me cry. I simply walked. It wasn't the termination that shattered me. I had endured worse. What broke was the method, the theatrical display, the expression on her face, as if she were granting the company a great favor by erasing my existence, as if I were an old filing cabinet, occupying space in her startup-inspired fantasy. At home, I set the succulent on the kitchen table and simply looked at it for a full 10 minutes. I had never even given the poor thing a name. I just called it Plant. It was still more steadfast than most of the people I worked with. I didn't have dinner that evening, just remained on the sofa in my work clothes, shoes still on, sensing the ghost of my ID badge hanging from my neck. I attempted to cry, but couldn't. The shame was too sterile, too calculated, like a surgical incision, with no blood, just a rush of cold air into the void. And then, around midnight, something shifted. I don't know if it was residual adrenaline, a surge of resentment, or just the last functioning neuron in my brain finally igniting, but I got up and went to my old bookcase, to the 4th shelf, tucked behind a hollowed-out copy of a popular memoir. Where I used to keep my good whiskey was my old laptop, the gray one with the faulty trackpad and keys that still had a faint scent of mint gum and anxiety. I connected it, turned it on, and waited for the ancient fan to stop its rattling cough. I logged in, and there it was, a folder, long neglected but never erased. Contingency, because the truth about working in one place for 12 years is that you witness everything, and if you're clever, which I am, you hold on to a few key documents. Just in case the designated heiress decides you no longer fit the vision, the subject line simply stated, "Need your eyes on something." I didn't sign it with my name. I didn't add a salutation. Just 3 short lines of text, sent from a throwaway email account I hadn't touched, since we all thought corporate chat apps were a fleeting trend. Review the items buried in Q4. Begin with the vendor expenditures, then locate the settlement. Then I clicked send. The recipient was Christine Bailey, a board member, a financial watchdog, a former colleague, now positioned high on the board's audit committee, with a knack for detecting financial discrepancies through a firewall. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. We didn't have to. If she read that email, she would understand. Christine never needed smoke to find a fire, only the faintest whiff of old money being burned. Back at Sloan's new headquarters, the corporate Hunger Games were in full swing. Each new social media post felt like a fresh cut. Please join me in welcoming our new strategic advisor, Brogan. Thrilled to announce Jet as our new director of growth. Brogan and Jet were two swaggering MBA graduates whom Sloan had once praised for creating a venture capital-funded juice business that failed before it even delivered a single product. They entered the office as if they already owned it, speaking in acronyms, scheduling 6 a.m., alignment meetings, and describing the layoffs as a necessary evolution. Sloan termed it infusing startup DNA. I called it a case of corporate malpractice, and yet, by some stroke of incredible luck, she never considered revoking my credentials for the development server or the legacy email routing for executive communications, an old, hidden inbox we had created during the merger to track auto-forwarded messages from senior leadership aliases. It was linked to a different domain. Most had forgotten it was there, but I hadn't. So while she was playing CEO in the large glass office, I watched the emails accumulate like a blizzard. Vendor grievances, budget miscalculations, a furious message from procurement asking who had authorized a $92,000 payment for strategic research to a firm named Kestrel Ventures LLC. That name made me pause, because Kestrel, as I recalled from our 2021 vendor review, had been flagged for connections to a competitor's family trust. And then the bombshell landed, an attached PDF in a thread concerning discretionary funds. It was legally stamped, marked with a confidential watermark, and the last modified field read, L. Carter, CEO. The memo was about final settlement RE, incident number 4721 approval and ND clause. It read like a legal autopsy report. A high-level executive had been accused of misconduct. Again, the specifics were hazy, with sections blacked out, but the settlement amount was unmistakable. $315,000 in return for a strict non-disclosure agreement, a binding arbitration clause, and 0 public statements. Signed, authorized, archived, all finalized just 3 days before Leland announced his sabbatical. Sloan was completely unaware. Hell, even the legal department likely assumed it was buried deep enough to be forgotten, but someone had copied the wrong distribution list. The shadows have long memories. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, my coffee now cold, and let the quiet sink in. This wasn't just an error. This was the kind of negligence that gets boards sued. That makes investors flee. The kind of decay that doesn't just tarnish reputations. It demolishes legacies. I printed the memo, watching the ink set like drying blood. Then I stapled it, one neat, precise corner, and I smiled like a woman holding a scalpel. It began as a whisper, 6 words that set off a bomb in the Human Resources Department. Clarification on Q4 settlements is required. Christine didn't make a phone call. She sent an email, brief, to the point. She didn't copy anyone else. And she sent it straight to Brenda in HR, the same Brenda who had once boasted over drinks that she could make any corporate scandal vanish before the office printer could even warm up. Her usual composed demeanor likely shattered the instant she saw Christine's name. The memo was never meant to see the light of day. It had been pieced together in secret, just another expense disguised as consulting services. Another signature on a discreet payment to maintain the company's pristine image. The accused executive had since retired for personal reasons and was now leading business seminars in Colorado. The victim had signed the agreement, disappeared, and left behind a void no one was brave enough to acknowledge. Until now, Brenda contacted legal. Legal contacted Leland's assistant. No one could get through to him at his mental clarity sabbatical, because, unsurprisingly, it wasn't a retreat. It was a long-term lease on a secluded property in Taos, with no internet access, and a single disposable phone, a classic corporate disappearing act. So they contacted Sloan. She sat back in her $1,200 ergonomic chair and blinked like a fawn, startled by a distant clap of thunder. "My father manages those things," she said, nibbling on a gluten-free protein bar, as if the topic were beneath her. "I don't deal with legacy issues." Legacy issues. That's what she called the sexual harassment settlement for a woman who had once single-handedly trained 3 of our departments and designed the very HR compliance framework Sloan's new hires were now disrupting. The board was not pleased with that response. Not at all. Meanwhile, I was in a vinyl booth at the Bluebird Diner off Highway 74, waiting for the woman Sloan had just dismissed as a legacy issue. Her name was Audrey. She had been the head of compliance before she disappeared without so much as a farewell email. She appeared older than I remembered, but also more focused. Trauma has a way of aging you in sharp, unforgiving ways, like how a tree's bark grows thicker around a wound. We both ordered coffee, and I got straight to the point. "I've seen the memo," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. 12 pages of legal jargon to hide 3 simple sentences he actually spoke. "Are you prepared to speak about it?" I asked. Audrey let out a laugh, but it held no humor. "There are no NDAs left to break. It expired last quarter. Time certainly moves quickly when your silence loses its value." I didn't push. I just reached into my bag and took out a USB drive. "Everything I have is on this," I said, sliding it across the worn tabletop like it was a loaded gun. "Emails, memos, authorizations, payment records. It's one signature away from being a subpoena." She picked it up, her expression suggesting it weighed a ton. "I will verify it," she said, "and then I will add my own story." Outside, the diner's sign cast a flickering glow. Inside, a quiet revolution was beginning, and the matchbook in my purse felt heavier with each passing second. He stormed in like a hurricane, in expensive leather shoes. Arriving 3 days earlier than planned, Leland swept through the lobby as if the building itself owed him an apology. No greeting, no handshake, just a harsh command that bounced off the glass walls. "You fired who?" Sloan had just begun her morning executive synergy session with Brogan and Jet, both of whom were now dressed as if they were perpetually in the middle of a venture capital pitch. The doors to the 14th floor flew open. Witnesses said you could hear a pin drop in the marketing department. Someone in accounting thought it was a fire drill. Leland didn't sit down, didn't even seem to pause for breath. He just moved from one office to the next, as if he were exorcising ghosts. Sloan tried to meet him with a smile and a cup from Bean and Brew. He knocked it onto a filing cabinet and demanded to see the organizational chart. She mumbled something about optimizing for agility, and he erupted. "You fired Clara from operations. You fired Sandeep from the supply chain. Good God, Sloan, you let Brogan greenlight a software change? He doesn't even know what SQL stands for." Sloan stared at him, her eyes glazing over, as though her father were being needlessly dramatic. "Dad, you told me to empower the new generation. I did what was necessary." Leland's face went pale, the color of a final demand notice. "You approved contracts you never read. You brought on vendors we hadn't vetted. I have 3 suppliers halting deliveries, and the legal team breathing down my neck." Then the final blow landed. His assistant entered, looking pale and trembling, carrying a printed PDF of a contract from the development server that was still pending final approval. Leland glanced at it, then looked again, his focus sharpening. Page 3, vendor authorization, a 6-figure retainer fee buried in the fine print. The vendor was Kestrel Ventures, LLC, a known shell corporation associated with Langdon and Finch, the same firm that had attempted to steal our largest corporate account the previous year. Sloan's digital signature was right there, time-stamped, authenticated, binding. Leland read it 3 times. "You authorized this," he whispered. I was told it was a market research firm," Sloan stammered. "Jet said they were strategic." Dad, I wasn't aware. He raised a hand, the same hand that had once shaken mine after we successfully completed the ERP system upgrade in 19. Now, it was trembling for an entirely different reason. Get out of my office, he said, his words tight and clipped. Sloane bolted. Her makeup was streaked, her ponytail swishing as she sobbed about being sabotaged and how people were trying to undermine her. She tried to find support from Brogan and Jet. They vanished. Typical startup allegiance, disappearing faster than a failed IPO. Back-channel conversations began to fill the air, like sparks from a faulty wire. The finance department went on high alert. Legal started meticulously reviewing the development server backups. Vendors began refusing to honor their agreements until a credible authority re-signed the terms. Leland scrambled to contain the damage, but the board was already circling, smelling the scent of squandered money and impending litigation. And as for me, I was enjoying a piece of toast at my kitchen table when my phone vibrated. A simple text message. No sender ID. He's back, and he's in over his head. I took a slow bite, swallowed, and opened the folder on my computer labeled Chronology Drafts 2. They chose a steakhouse, the type of place with low lighting, servers in starched white shirts, and napkins so plush they could absorb a corporate scandal. I showed up 5 minutes early because women in my position do not arrive late to meetings that feel like sentencing hearings. 2 members of the board were in the booth. Christine, as stern and composed as always, and Augustus, who looked as if he had aged a decade since the Q4 audit first came to light. "Thank you for joining us," Christine said. No small talk, just a tone sharp enough to cut glass. "We require some context." I ordered a coffee. Black. No cream. No sugar. No illusions. They didn't ask about my dismissal. They didn't ask about the trail of destruction Sloane had left, the fired employees, the disrupted workflows, or the fact that our customer attrition rate had hit double digits in just 4 business days. What they wanted, what they truly needed, was the story behind the data, the unvarnished timeline, the decay beneath the polished floors. Sloane's incompetence broke the surface. I began, pushing a notepad to the side, but the rot was there long before her stilettos ever touched the lobby floor. Christine leaned forward. Augustus remained perfectly still. I laid it all out for them, slowly, methodically, like a surgeon. The 2018 complaint that vanished after the accused executive was discreetly moved to another department. The 2019 conference incident that HR brushed off as a miscommunication. The 2021 settlement that was recorded as a training expense. Each year, a different woman. Each time, the same playbook. A paper trail erased. A signature secured by a confidentiality agreement. A promotion given to a man who should have been facing legal charges. Leland didn't just have knowledge of it, I explained. He designed the cover-ups. Sloane didn't demolish a pristine house. She ripped the walls off a contaminated structure. The audit trails, the confidential memos, the payments funneled through shell companies, all of it concealed behind Leland's impeccable social media presence and his glowing magazine interviews about ethical leadership. Christine was silent for a moment. Augustus cleaned his glasses with a linen napkin, as if he couldn't stand to look at the table. Finally, she asked, "Would you be willing to formalize this in a written statement?" I reached into my bag and produced a thick, red folder labeled in bold marker, Chronology of Deceit. I placed it on the table softly, like setting the final stone on a tomb. All sources are cited, cross-referenced, and time-stamped. Neither of them moved to touch it immediately. It just sat there, a palpable, loaded presence. Across the city, meanwhile, Sloane was coming apart like a cheap sweater in the wash. According to a very talkative developer I used to guide through late-night system updates, she had cornered the IT director in the staff kitchen and offered him $1,000 in cash to tidy up the development server logs. He told her he would investigate it, then promptly reported her to the legal department before he had even finished his yogurt. By the close of business, the boardroom was on lockdown. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. The rumors spread faster than Leland's last excuse. It was Christine who called for the motion, an emergency vote of no confidence. Not in Leland, not in Sloan, but in the system itself. The true system, the one built on truth, accountability, and the people who had been holding the damn place together while the entitled heirs destroyed the property. The vote was carried, and the countdown began. The boardroom doors shut at precisely 9 a.m. Leland entered in full battle dress, a custom-tailored navy suit, his wedding ring gleaming, his jaw set as if he'd been grinding stones. Sloan followed him, her eyes swollen from a night of damage control and tears, yet still defiantly wearing a pastel pink blazer, as if it were a symbol of her authority. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and silent. What neither of them realized was that the decisive meeting had already taken place, the moment the red folder landed on Christine's desk and began to be duplicated as if by a possessed machine. Copies showing Leland's signature, Sloan's approval stamps, wire transfers to shell corporations, memos that read like coded messages. The first slide of the presentation was blunt. Chronology of misconduct. Internal summary review. Leland blinked. Sloan looked as if she'd just been struck across the face with her own resume. Augustus began, his voice calm and direct. We have examined financial records from the fourth quarter of the last 5 years. A number of transactions require legal review, and we are flagging potential violations of fiduciary responsibility. Christine took over, turning pages as if she were tallying up transgressions. These settlements were authorized without board approval. The vendor, Kestrel Ventures, appears to be a shell company linked to a competitor. Funds were transferred without proper oversight. The audit logs reveal suspicious activity. These are profound failures of governance, Leland. Leland's jaw tensed. We addressed those situations internally, following legal advice. Christine was unfazed. That was not your decision to make. Sloan interjected, her voice shaking with desperation. This is a setup. You're holding him responsible for issues he was trying to shield the company from. Leland silenced her without even looking in her direction. That's enough. You've caused enough trouble. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Sloan flinched, blinking rapidly. Dad, you told me I was prepared. You said He didn't reply. The vote was swift. Christine called for it. Augustus seconded. Of the 7 members, 5 hands went up. 1 abstained. 1 remained down just long enough to make the rejection clear. Both Leland and Sloan were put on immediate, temporary administrative leave, with all their company credentials revoked. An external compliance firm was scheduled to arrive by the end of the week. Sloan completely lost her composure. This is a conspiracy, she yelled, knocking over her water glass. You're all just envious because I implemented changes. This was all supposed to be mine. Leland stood silently. He didn't defend her, didn't refute anything. He just stared at the carpet, as if watching his entire legacy crumble at his feet. By 10:15, they were escorted from the premises. No applause, no official statement, just an eerie silence and the faint whir of legal's printers churning out subpoenas. And me? I was in a booth at Leo's Bistro, with a tepid latte and a phone displaying a live feed of the security cameras, a feed some helpful soul in the facilities department had accidentally shared with me. I watched Sloane's heels click sharply on the polished floor, like a final, angry punctuation mark. Leland trailed behind her, his shoulders slumped. I took a sip of my coffee, bit into a dry pastry, and whispered to myself, that should do it. The email was sent at 7:42 a.m. on a Monday. Its subject line was a masterclass in corporate ambiguity, organizational update and interim leadership transition. Most employees didn't bother opening it right away, too preoccupied with getting coffee, hoarding their paid time off like precious resources, or scanning professional networks for signs of another corporate shakeup. But as soon as it began to make the rounds, The company chat exploded because hidden 5 paragraphs deep, after all the corporate jargon about vision recalibration and long-term strategic oversight, was the real story. Effective immediately, Clara Reed will assume the role of interim chief operating officer, reporting directly to the board of directors, not returning, not assisting, not advising. COO, the very role I had propped up from the shadows for 12 years, through 3 different CEOs, 2 product failures, and 1 near miss with a federal audit. The role I had trained others for while being told I lacked executive presence. Now it was mine, official, with a title that resonated like a judge's gavel in a very satisfying courtroom. Sloane's name was absent from the announcement. Leland's was mentioned only once, buried under the phrase, temporary leave, pending internal and federal review. As it turns out, SEC investigators appreciate whistleblowers who come with meticulously organized evidence and a perfect recall for approval dates. Civil suits were already in motion. Investor relations had been brought into the loop, and even the HR director had started to walk more cautiously, as if the ground might give way beneath her. A courier delivered a new laptop and an embossed folder to my home. The new ID badge felt heavier in my hand, or perhaps that was just the weight of finally being acknowledged. I returned to the office without any fuss. No balloons, no congratulatory cake from the head of product development, just a few surprised glances in the elevator, and a deeply gratifying encounter where Brogan from Strategy tried to shake my hand, and I instead handed him a printed copy of the email thread from his disastrous vendor deal. By Friday, I had moved into the executive suite, the same floor where Leland used to deliver quarterly pep talks, with a smile full of false promises. And that's when I saw it. The door that once displayed his name. The glass was frosted, the wood polished, once treated as a shrine to a deluded man. Now it was bare, just a single word engraved in brushed metal. Reserved. I paused there for a second. I thought about every evening I had worked past midnight, reworking financial projections to secure someone else's bonus. I thought about the day Sloane had smirked and declared I didn't fit the vision. I thought about Audrey, and the folder, and the matchbook in my purse I never needed to light. Then I smiled. A genuine, small, conclusive smile. I guess I am useful after all, I said, and walked into my office.